Said this afternoon that they had retaken that area, then qualified it by saying there were still pockets of fighting, but isolated, and we understand that fighting has continued into the evening.
Now, Libya relies heavily on imports, and food distribution is becoming a serious problem. As Tim Friend reports, Gaddafi's forces have been accused of withholding food from rebel-held areas.
Not guns or missiles, but food. And in a protracted conflict in Libya, it could determine the outcome more crucially than any conventional weapon. Here in rebel-held AlJazeera, the baker, Agu Fakri, reveals that the use of food as a weapon by Gaddafi supporters has already begun.
Obviously, there's no stock of flour left. We had a small quantity coming from Tripoli, but it was taken back. We saw it on TV being brought as far as Sirte. We saw that the leader said the flour could come to the east, and then the flour was turned back by those highway bandits of his.
The World Food Programme is calling for urgent and safe access to Libya after a ship carrying vital food aid was unable to dock at the port city of Benghazi on the Mediterranean coast due to security concerns. The WFP has launched an emergency operation costing more than $39 million to provide much-needed food aid for Libyans inside the country and those who fled into neighbouring Tunisia and Egypt.
We were getting reports from those crossing the border into Tunisia just earlier this week about food being used as a potential weapon. We heard that some of Gaddafi's supporters were trying to deny some of the rebels food in certain areas. I mean, if they see any food trucks coming in, they may be able to stop them. And this is the last thing we want to see, of course, because food should be available to everybody.
Libya relies on food imports. A staggering 90% of all food supplies come from abroad. Many foreign workers are employed in farming and food production, but with migrants fleeing in their thousands, food supplies are suffering. But it's not only food. In 2000, more than a quarter of the population did not have access to safe drinking water. Global food prices have already reached new highs this year and could suffer the impact of further oil price spikes amid turmoil in Libya and the Middle East. Skyrocketing food prices were among the triggers for protests in Egypt and Tunisia. And once again, they're playing a central role in revolution. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera.
Now to Egypt, where several people have been injured after protesters fought with police in the country's second biggest city, Alexandria. This amateur video is said to show protesters ransacking the headquarters of the state security agency. They say police were trying to destroy documents linked to past abuses. Witnesses say the security forces opened fire on the demonstrators. And in Cairo's Tahrir Square, thousands of protesters welcomed newly appointed Prime Minister Essam Sharaf. He joined the crowd, which swelled after Friday prayers. Sharaf promised he'd stay committed to their goals.
I'm here because I get my legitimacy from you. I will exert all my efforts to respond to your demands. And if I fail, I will join you.
Hundreds of protesters rallied across Oman on Friday, demanding political reform and better working conditions. Rival demonstrations also took place in support of Oman's ruler, Sultan Qaboos bin Said. In the other industrial city of Sohar, protesters called for an end to corruption and higher wages. Our correspondent there sent this report, and for his safety, we're not naming him.
Friday prayer in Oman's second largest city of Sohar, and more than 2,000 protesters turned the main traffic intersection into a place of worship. The anti-government sentiment here in Oman differs from the rest of the region's turmoil in two key ways. There's been much less violence and much more love for their leader.
We are making this to support the Sultan, not to face the Sultan. This is another thing. We are just facing the corruption here.
Sultan Qaboos Al Said brought peace to Oman soon after taking power in a palace coup 41 years ago. He also delivered paved roads, a public health system and more women's rights than other Gulf countries. But like the rest of the Arab world, Omanis now yearn for more. Military helicopters buzz over the crowd, but there hasn't been a repeat of last week's violence where at least one protester was killed by riot police, while a shopping centre, police station and government building were all torched. These protesters say they denounce acts of violence, but hope a calm, peaceful plea will be heard by their beloved leader.
If he did know, he will change, we are sure.
How long do you plan to stay here for?
Until all our demands will be achieved.
The role of the military is key here now, respected by the people much more than the police, but they have very little experience in dealing with civil unrest, leaving the days ahead filled with uncertainty.
The U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has condemned the killing of at least 6 female protesters in Côte d'Ivoire. They were taking part in a rally calling for President Laurent Gbagbo to accept November's election results and step down. Imran Khan reports.
Dancing, singing, the message is clear. Gbagbo must go. It's a light-hearted demonstration. The women use leaves to symbolically brush away his regime. Then this. These pictures were taken on Thursday and could mark the turning point in the disputed elections of Côte d'Ivoire. 6 women were murdered. You can clearly see camouflage vehicles drive through the crowd. The UN claimed that these were pro-government forces. That's denied by the Gbagbo loyalist army, who said that they were not operating here in Abobo. Many fear that more incidents like this could drag the country into civil war. Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, says Gbagbo must step down.
The pressure is on, and I think if the population sustain their efforts, maintain the pressure for him to go, he eventually will have to go. Other leaders said they weren't going, but they are not around.
The situation has led to widespread panic. On Friday, many rushed to withdraw money from banks. Others are fearful that continued violence could lead to genocide, that thousands could die. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera.
China's Premier Wen Jiabao has pledged to reduce inflation and corruption and raise his people's income levels. Wen told the National People's Congress in Beijing the measures are necessary to maintain social stability. The theme of happiness, along with China's latest 5-year economic plan, dominated his address at the start of this year's parliamentary session. Al Jazeera's Melissa Chan has more from Beijing.
Usually the opening day of the National People's Congress is an opportunity for self-congratulation by the Chinese government. They often look at the past year and what they have achieved, both economically and socially. This year, it's a bit dour, with Premier Wen Jiabao looking at the problems the country is facing. He talks about the need for better health care for this country. There's not much of a health system, really, and he talked about greater access to medication. He also talked about real estate. It's a serious issue in this country. It's just very costly, the cost of rent and the cost of purchasing homes. And the Premier promised quite a sweeping promise that 20% of urban houses will be low income in the near future. He also talked about education and access to education, and for those